International corporate governance can differ to the corporate governance that we have within the UK. Namely, there are many different views regarding the responsibility of the company to the shareholder, and the two main views are listed below. What we have here is the broad principles of corporate governance are similar in the UK, the US and Germany, but there are significant differences in how they are applied. What you have in UK and Germany is it's a much more voluntary acceptance of the code. This is what we're going to all agree that we're going to try to do. Where in the US, you've got the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which makes it a legal requirement that you must meet the guidelines laid down by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Now, after what happened with the collapse of Enron several years ago, the USA set up much stricter kind of codes for best practice that you had to abide to, where the UK and Germany laid out these guidelines is what we should try to do, but if you deviate from these rules, as long as you try to justify why it was in the best interest of your shareholders, it was acceptable. But within the US, it's much stricter, and you have to abide to these rules. You don't have any say in the matter at all. Looking at a couple of things in a bit more detail, within the USA, it says, whereas the UK has historically relied upon a system of self-regulation, everybody just trying to make sure they're doing the right thing, and voluntary codes of practice, the USA corporate governance structure is more formalised with legal enforceable controls. So as we said, you have to meet these requirements. Now, the main points laid out by the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, it says, the requirements include the certification of published financial statements by the Chief Executive Officer, the Chief Financial Officer, with faster public disclosures by company, legal protection for whistleblowers, a requirement for an annual report on internal controls, and requirements relating to the audit committee, auditor conduct, and avoiding improper influence of auditors. Now, as mentioned before, you don't have to learn all these detailed rules. What you need to understand is it's quite prescriptive on what you have to do in terms of making sure that you're acting in the best interest of your shareholders. So the Chief Executive Officer and the Chief Financial Officer will both make a statement at the start of the financial statements, which has to be certified that it's true and fair, that they're saying the right things, detailing the position of the company and specifically detailing the financial position of the company. But what they try to do is also introduce the idea that you have to disclose any material information as it comes to light as fast as possible, but also bring in legal protection for any whistleblowers. So if a member of the company, if an employee, feels that there is something going on that doesn't meet this code, that they think is fraudulent and shouldn't be happening, then they can whistleblow on the company and they will receive protection to make sure they're not going to be at a loss as a result of it. Now, in Germany, it says, as both the UK and Germany are members of the EU, they must both follow EU directives on company law. A major difference, however, that exists in the board structures of companies is that in the UK has a unitary board consisting of both executive and non-executive directors, where Germany companies have a two-tier board of directors. So what you can actually have in the UK is a complete board of directors, but we'll have what's called the executive directors and your non-executive directors, with your executive directors making all of your major financial decisions, with the other non-executive directors on the board supporting these other directors. Within Germany, you have a supervisory board of non-executives, which has responsibility for corporate policy and strategy, and the management board of executive directors has responsibility primarily for the day-to-day operations of the company. So what you've got here is a board of directors split, with part of the board looking at making sure that we meet our corporate governance responsibilities, but also thinking about the direction of where we want this company to be, looking at the strategy of how we want to move this company forward in the future. The other half of the board are the board who are actually trying to make the whole business operate almost on a day-to-day basis. We're looking a little bit more short-term, making sure that we're going to have products, we're going to be making the sales, and we're keeping our costs under control. And finally, just as a comparison, they have a completely different system within Japan. Much of the Japanese system is based upon negotiation or consensual management rather than upon a legal or even a self-regulatory system. Now, what we've just literally got here is a group of people within the organisation who sit together and determine what they think is the best thing for the companies to do, as opposed to having these procedures laid out to them. Banks, as well as representatives of other companies in their capacity as shareholders, also sit on the board of directors of Japanese companies. So this is much more inclusive of all of the stakeholders who are incorporated within the business. If a bank has lent the company money, if you've got other companies who are shareholders of this business, major shareholders, all of these people have representation of the board because ultimately it is their money that is at stake within the business. There are often 3 boards of directors, policy boards responsible for strategy and comprised of directors with no functional responsibility, functional boards responsible for day-to-day operations, and largely symbolic monocratic boards. So what you've got here is the 2 main boards with regards to one for policy and one for function. So the policy boards, similar to that German system, where they're trying to plan the overall direction of the company, the strategy of where we want to be long term. We then have the functional boards looking at how the business operates on a day-to-day basis. But then we have these symbolic boards, people that are president of the company who may not be involved in decisions, may not be involved with the long-term strategy of the business, but is almost the face of the company, represents what the company is doing and can interact with the general public and other workers. The interests of the boards as a whole should dictate the actions of these boards. This in contrast to the UK or the USA systems where, at least in theory, the board should act primarily in the best interest of the shareholders, being the owners of the company. So what we have here is all the people who are on the board of directors, they're going to dictate how the company is run, because these people on the board of directors are your main fundamental stakeholders of the business, and we're not just trying to make our shareholders better off. What we're trying to do here is try to look after every single one of our stakeholders, because the business cannot operate unless all of these stakeholders are happy.